Well, it's spring in Toronto, and quite surprisingly, it's election season again. John Tory resigned for the kind of thing that nobody resigns for anymore, and now we're having a by-election. And actually, perhaps the most interesting election that we've had in Ontario, certainly in Toronto, since maybe 2014, so about 10 years. 2014, when John Tory was first elected, the last time that we had a voter turnout in Toronto that was above 50%, in fact, 55%, which was greater than the previous election in 2010 when Rob Ford won. So that election in 2014 with the 55% voter turnout was you wouldn't call it a three-way split, but there was an election with three actual contenders. You couldn't say that so much about 2010 when Rob Ford won, when there were really only two actual contenders, and then Joe, I keep wanting to call him Joe Pantalone, which is, isn't that that's the guy from The Matrix. Right. Well, anyway, Joe P, who only managed like maybe 100,000 votes, 98,000 votes, which is about the same as Gil Peñalosa got in the last election, the one, last year, where John Tory thundered back to the mayor's office. So we've got an unexpected election. We've got a cardinal over there in the background. That's actually a contest between a lot of people. We've got Anna Bailão, the former councillor. We've got Olivia Chow taking a second run at it after 2014. Josh Matlow, the councillor. Mitzi Hunter, the MPP. Mark Saunders, the former police chief. Chloe Brown, who ran in the election last year. Brad Bradford, a councillor. And those are just like the quasi-serious candidates, which are to say the candidates who might actually be taking the election seriously. And then you've got your Anthony Furies, your Frank D'Angelo, the energy drink, cheap beer guy, George Mammoliti, Anthony Peruzza, Selena Caesar Chavanas, who I thought was perhaps a serious person, but registered and then, I don't know, kind of quasi-dropped out of the race. I haven't heard from her. So it's a real race. And there are two things in this race that I think I want to touch on today as we get over the hump of the sort of initial who's going to run, who isn't going to run part of the race, and we start to get into like the race itself. And those two things are how to discern between who you like and who you think is going to win, and how to talk about that. And the second one is the idea of coalescing votes. Let's go for a wee walk in the valley, heading toward the Science Center. Purely by coincidence, I'm sure. Okay. So, like I said, this is the first campaign in almost 10 years that's actually tightly contested. And it's also the first campaign in 10 years, certainly not the first campaign that's been fought on social media, but the first campaign since that Doug Ford, John Tory, Olivia Chow election, where, in my opinion, we actually have something to contest apart from our general depression over the lack of serious or viable alternatives to the front-running candidate, right? That was the case in the last two elections here. Jen Keesmaat, I know a lot of people like Jen Keesmaat, but she got into the race at the absolute last second and was not a strong campaigner. Gil Peñalosa, lots of great ideas, or at least some great ideas, but not a serious contender, or could not seriously contend against an entrenched incumbent. So those two elections really about like, geez, isn't it too bad that we're not having a more tightly contested election? So now we have one. And because there are so many people running, I find I have to refine my commentary a bit. Because, to be perfectly honest, I haven't decided who I'm going to vote for, and there are several people who I might vote for. And so when I talk about the election, I need to separate who I like, as in who I might vote for, with who I think will win. And I've seen people, especially on Twitter, I do most of that kind of commentary on Twitter, as you may know. I've seen people talking about that distinction. Just because I say something positive about candidate X doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to vote for them. Just because I say something negative about candidate Y doesn't mean I'm completely against them. I think that this is a phenomenon most often seen on the left. I don't get the impression that people who really support Mark Saunders, for example, care much what other people think about that. But people on the left care very much about what their colleagues and compatriots think about who they're supporting and why. For example, in the context of this campaign, I like Josh Matlow. I think Josh Matlow is an interesting candidate in this campaign. Is he a candidate who has said things or done things in the past that I disagree with? Yes, of course. Of course. But I think it's important to think about these things in their current context. So I like Matlow. I like Chloe Brown. I voted for Chloe Brown in the last election. I think Chloe Brown is a person who has excellent, interesting ideas. Okay? I don't care for Mark Saunders at all. You couldn't pay me to vote for Mark Saunders. You couldn't pay me to vote for Ana Bailão, for that matter. Ana Bailão, who is not on paper particularly offensive in any way, voted for things and against things that I don't agree with, but is not viscerally offensive in the way that, say, I find Mark Saunders. Okay? But all that said, I think the top two candidates in this election are Ana Bailão and Mark Saunders. I think those are the two people who have the best chance of taking this election if it were held tomorrow. I think that most people would split their vote between who they view as the safe centrist candidate, which is Ana Bailão, and who they see as the ideological candidate, the successor to sort of Rob and Doug Ford in the city of Toronto, and that's Mark Saunders. I don't want them to win, but I think they will, or I think they very well can. Which brings us neatly to the final point about coalescing a vote, about blocks of voters owing it to one thing or another to get together and vote for a single candidate. And I can get behind that idea in principle. However, where you lose me is when you come out of the gate right away and say, person X, in the case of this campaign, Olivia Chow, deserves your vote because she's the only viable candidate, despite the fact that there's absolutely no reason to believe that on its face. What has Olivia Chow done? Or any candidate. I'm not just picking on Olivia Chow. But that's the one people are saying that the left progressive vote in this city should coalesce behind. And I'm asking, why? Why should we do that? What is in it for us? Because when there's an argument that gets used mostly in progressive circles that we owe it to the country, we owe it to the province, we owe it to those less advantaged than us to vote for progressive candidates to prevent bad things from happening. Now, I've been voting for progressive left candidates my entire life, and bad things have never stopped happening. In fact, I think it is inarguable that our situation here in Canada, in Ontario, in Toronto, is worse than ever. In fact, that's really what this election should be about. Here I am standing right next to Ontario Place, which is, at least in some part, what this election has been about in its early days. But what it really ought to be about is that things keep getting progressively worse. Progressively worse. Now, it would be the old post hoc ergo propter hoc to say that I've been voting for progressives to keep bad things from happening and bad things have been happening, ergo one thing is linked to the other. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that progressive candidates need to do more than just ask us to support them because they're progressive. I'm tired of that argument. I can't hear it anymore. If your candidate deserves my vote, they have to show it. They have to prove it. They have to prove it right now in this current moment. We can only evaluate the candidates in the context of this election. Oh, I'd take my coat off. It got hot. I'm tired. I'm dog tired of having my vote taken for granted, of having my support taken for granted. And you should be, if you're a progressive voter, you should be dog tired of this too. I'm telling you, you should be dog tired of having your vote and your support taken for granted because you owe it, theoretically owe that support to a progressive candidate to stop bad things from happening. It doesn't work. The candidates have to work harder. They have to come out with bolder proposals. They have to earn those votes, or at the very least, they have to stretch, you like that? They have to stretch beyond their expected voter base. The people who will vote for them, no matter who they are, no matter what they say, to prevent the bad things from happening. They have to go beyond that. It's not enough. Olivia Chow was a great option in 2014. I wanted to support her eventually, after David Soknacki left the race. But that was mostly because she wasn't John Tory or Doug Ford / Rob Ford, the Ford family. She's got to work harder this time. Josh Matlow's working hard. I don't know if it's going to be enough. I like the guy, I don't know if it's going to be enough. Chloe Brown is running for something other than mayor right now. She's running for, I don't even know that she's running. She's using her campaign to start some kind of a social movement. Campaigns are not movements, but they can become movements. And the rest, Bailão, Saunders, the ones who are really dangerous from an electoral prospects perspective, are hanging back, waiting for the real campaign to begin in another few weeks. I implore you, don't give your vote away for nothing. Demand something. You don't have to be wooed. You're not children, you're not babies. You don't have to be wooed. But they owe it to you to give you something in exchange for your vote, to give you a policy that matters to you, to give you a position that matters to you. You are owed that as a voter. Ask for it. And just because you ask for it doesn't mean you don't like that candidate, doesn't mean that you're not likely to vote for them. It just means that you're demanding more. And it is more important, especially early on in a campaign, to be a demanding person than a supportive one.